Hello.
So, welcome to this session about unlocking climate action through popular film and fiction. I'm Genevieve Hilton, and I'm an author and climate writer, as well as a reporter on climate action. This topic, I think, is very interesting for the World Green Economic Organization because we are interested in how a green future, a green economy in the future, can be envisioned and not just talked about now, but what we can really do to make it happen in the future. So climate change is happening now. I think everyone at COP30 is seeing the results of it. We're finding new statistics all the time. And on 2024 was already above 1.5 degrees centigrade. It's happening, and the global economy now is already feeling the impact. Not only the economy, but the people who live in this economy, the people who have the lives who are being impacted by climate change, coastal people, fisher people, and agriculture, of course, as well as those being impacted by extreme weather events. At the same time, this is prompting climate relocation, which is another huge economic factor and an influence on what's happening in the future. We also see tropical diseases expanding their range, which is in turn impacting the healthcare economy, impacting the way that the green economy, or rather showing the fact that the green economy is not only related to selling electric vehicles, but it's also interrelated and interconnected to every topic and every type of economic driver there is. We see when rising temperatures happen, we see the spread of Anopheles mosquitoes, we see water sources evaporate, so we're seeing infrastructure being affected by climate change as well. Now, one of the greatest impacts on economy is, of course, war. When war happens and when conflicts happen, this can totally disrupt an economic structure that seemed extremely stable in the past. As such, the factors that lead to conflict are often related to climate change, although it's almost never a direct one-to-one correlation. And the factors that lead from climate change to conflict and conflict leading to climate change, it is, again, interrelated and circular. These factors are something that is often misunderstood or, say, poorly understood because of their complexity. So the question is, should you just panic or give up or try to find some kind of solution? People who are at COP30 are obviously trying to find solutions. They are working on transportation. They are working on fossil fuels. They are working on every kind of economic factor. But outside of COP30, too many people are choosing to just give up and say, oh, there's nothing else we can do. We've blown past the 1.5 target, so that's it. And this, in turn, is creating climate anxiety in quite a lot of people around the world, especially in youth. In the United States, we saw 10% of people are nervous, anxious, or on edge, not just once, but several days per week. 9% were unable to stop or control worry about global warming. And in in China, we had 31.3% who were terrified about climate change. 26% in Australia were very or extremely concerned, and that is a figure among youth. Once we take the broader numbers, then it gets even worse. And one of the reasons that this climate anxiety is increasing is because that's what our screens say. We have social media hubs about collapse. We have news media that are coming with worse and worse news every day. We have fictional portrayals like Black Mirror, and we have books like Overshoot. But there is an alternative to climate denialism and not climate denialism, but there's also an alternative to climate doomerism. So, future hasn't yet arrived, and we have already made progress from the original track we were on several years ago, before the Paris Agreement, before we started this COP process. So why are we focusing on the negative? Why are we focusing on this doomerism when we have shown that action works? So in fact, climate change is a continuum. Adaptation and mitigation measures are a continuum. While we do, of course, need to look at tipping points where things can accelerate very rapidly, it's very often misunderstood as an either-or issue. Either you do it perfectly well and everything goes perfectly right, or else you give up and then the rest of the world will be a Mad Max wasteland forever and we'll never find any solution. One of the interesting points is that even the people who are doomerists in a certain sense understand that nuance. So there's a book you can see here called How We Sold Our Future. It's probably one of the most depressing books I've ever read, but it also is the source of this quote, that it isn't an either-or issue, it's one of more or less. So why is that either-or-ism persisting? One of the tools that we can use to create action that will not be just coming up with either-or situations is action-based climate fiction. And there's a long quote here, which is from an academic paper by Chris de Meyer at the University College London. And there's 3 keywords in it. One is storytelling. If we create relationships between the reader and the speaker, then we tap into something very human, because we are human creatures, we are animals, we are primates, we are social primates. We love stories because we love knowing about what happens to other humans. This is much more true than wanting to know about what happens with objects and molecules. We love stories. But those stories have to tell us positive actions. They have to portray positive actions if they're going to be useful in the way we address climate change. And they also have to be practical, because, okay, it's great to have a story about positive action, which involves some kind of magical solution. If that solution is not available to us, it's not practical, then we can't use it. The reason we know that this storytelling can work is because it's already happened. Fiction has changed history multiple times over the years. We've seen this in the 1890s in the Philippines, when there's a book called The Reign of Greed, or Filibusterismo. And this is often credited as being the source of the Philippines Revolution, or the reason for the Philippines Revolution. We have the book Uncle Tom's Cabin in the 1850s in the United States, often called the source of the United States Civil War. And this book has often been credited not only with starting the Civil War, but being its result was that it changed the perception of human slavery in the United States, not only in the United States, but around the world. And this is from a book which arguably is not that well written. I mean, if you read Uncle Tom's Cabin today, it's not that exciting, it's not that interesting, and it's very schlocky and romantic. But you know what? It still worked. We also see this coming to play more and more in films and TV shows as that medium became more popular. There was a made-for-TV movie called The Day After, which came out when I was a kid. I was not allowed to watch it because I was not old enough. But you know who was allowed to watch it was President Ronald Reagan. And if you read his diary, you'll see that, which it's on display in the Ronald Reagan Museum, and you'll see this diary which says, tonight I watched the movie The Day After, which was about nuclear war, and I became determined to never allow this to happen. And this was a turning point for Ronald Reagan in his negotiations with the then Soviet Union about nuclear disarmament. So these are things that really create a difference because of that human context. More recently, we have the TV show Will and Grace, which changed perceptions on marriage equality in the United States. And even climate fiction, there's a movie called The Day After Tomorrow that came out in the year 2000s, or earlier 2000s. It's a kind of a piece of schlock. I remember watching it when it came out in the theater and laughing throughout several of the scenes because it was just over-the-top disaster. But after that movie, you started to see people who had watched the movie wanting to know more about climate change and wanting to know why it was happening. So even schlocky disaster films can make a difference. There are lots and lots of more examples of this, but one of my favorites is the book that I read as a child called Black Beauty, which was about a horse. And the horse complained about a certain strap called the bearing rein, which was attached at the back of the bridle. And the horse hated the bridle, this bearing rein, so much that I think he spent a good chapter talking about it. And after that book was published, the use of the bearing rein in England disappeared within 3 years. And that was a horse, a children's book about a horse. So these things can happen. But when we come to titles about climate change, they are, number one, hopeless, and number two, they're all about the global north. These are some of the climate change novels, the climate fiction novels that exist. You know, American War, The Drowned World, The Water Knife. To his credit, Paolo Bacigalupi does write about Thailand sometimes, but it's still pretty grim. It's very much, you know, Thailand as victim rather than Thailand as action force. Neil Stephenson's book Termination Shock, written during the pandemic, also pretty grim and is very America-focused, although it has a global scope. So we see these books being very negative and a lot of them are for the adventure of it, you know, putting people into terrible conditions. My co-author, a guy called Steve Willis, actually did this chart showing where the books are, and movies and TV shows, and a lot of them, even if they are utopian, they're unrealistic. So you have things that are dystopian but very realistic. Things like Handmaid's Tale is getting very realistic nowadays. You have things like, you know, things that, you know, maybe Mad Max, which is a little bit extreme, but could be plausible in the worst conditions. But on the other hand, you have things like these magical things like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's utopian, but it relies on time travel. You have things like the Black Panther movie, which is a green techno society, but it's in a fictional country that doesn't exist. It depends on a magical element that doesn't exist, and it involves going to the spirit land, which, as far as we know, doesn't exist. So where is everything in that upper right-hand corner? Where are the positive climate stories that actually could happen? Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson it's kind of almost there. It does show things going right after a while. I think the 2030s are in a Great Depression. There's 200,000 people killed in the first chapter by a heat wave in India. But, you know, other than that, it's pretty optimistic. So that's why we decided to write Fairhaven, a novel of climate optimism. This was published by a publisher who specializes in eco-fiction called Habitat Press, UK. We presented it at COP28 for the first time and then launched it the following year. And it presents climate projects as being something that are happening in real life. It shows a bunch of people who are working actively to address climate change. There's nothing in the book which is saying everything will be okay. There's not an optimistic viewpoint like that says, oh, if you can just sit back and relax, people will fix it. It's much more about we fix it, how we can fix it. So the story is starts in 2036. Grace Chan is the president of Ocean Independent State. And by the way, I have not yet been over to the Ocean Pavilion yet to see what they think about this. But they are lightly fictionalized in the story. And she's about to take office. Her car gets stuck in the mud, and she's thinking about what got her here. You don't find out whether she survives until a few chapters in. From then, the story goes on to the solutions. The first solution that's presented in the book is coastal adaptation. We take the mainland Malaysia here and the island of Penang here, and we join them up with two dikes and a system of locks that will protect the Penang coast and the mainland coast. And in the book, this is fictional, this project is already starting to be underway. We show how this would actually work. So Grace Chen, when she first gets out of college, she's working as an engineer on Fairhaven. Another project is for albedo enhancement, which is in the Arctic. And this is a real project. People are really doing this, but not at the scale that's shown in the book. So there's a character called Kenji Fujimoto. He goes to the Arctic. He's going through the process, and you see him striving to make this work. You also see the financial mechanisms that allow it to work. You see the board meetings where he has to argue his case. And by the way, that's one of my contributions to the book, because I've spent a long time in the corporate world, and I know what those board meetings are like. Another solution that's presented is sea orchards, and that's the one you see on the cover of the book. The purpose, or the genesis of this project, as presented in the book, is that there's a lot of marine life that's under oil rigs, under the decommissioned oil rigs. So what if we could make those decommissioned oil rigs into something on purpose that would create a carbon sink by increasing marine biomass? And maybe this would work, maybe it wouldn't. But again, the idea is we show people taking action to address climate change. The sustainability people, for once, are the actual heroes of the book. At the same time, we also have a view of climate change as disaster prevention and disaster resilience. And the main character, Grace Chen, is kind of obsessed with disasters. She's watched the Titanic movie, 100 times. She looks at disasters all the time, and she herself has climate anxiety. One of the things she does to address her own climate anxiety is she writes stories about disasters. She writes about the Titanic. She writes about the Flicksboro chemical plant disaster. She writes about the 1986 explosion of the Challenger. She writes about the Sichuan earthquake. But she reimagines them in a fictional universe as if the disaster had either been prevented or mitigated. And obviously, every single one of these is a metaphor for climate change. The disaster that looks really big, it seems inevitable, but maybe it can be prevented or mitigated. It doesn't have to happen. But as it happened, Grace had more stories to tell. Steve and I looked at all the other disasters that have happened over the years. That's the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. That's the Hurricane Katrina. That's the Iraq mercury poisoning. I think 2011, that's Fukushima, and that's Mount Merapi in Indonesia. I mean, we can't prevent the volcano from erupting, right? But we can mitigate the impact of the ones that do. So we wrote Grace's stories. So all of the stories that appear fictionally in the book, the first book, are also now been published as a second book, which is the short stories about disaster prevention and mitigation. So we have all of these stories, but the important thing is that the disasters and the people who are the heroes of the stories are coming from all over the place. What we want to show is that everybody has a role. So even if you are a coal miner, or even if you are an equerry to a personal servant to somebody in UK, even if you are someone who's selling rice in Iraq, you have selling barley in Iraq, you have a role. There's a potential role for you in addressing climate change. These are from all over the world. There are people from every walk of life, but yes, also presidents, and also, I think we have some royalty in there as well. The purpose of talking about all of this is to show that not every disaster can be prevented, but many can be mitigated. So if you look even at the cover of the second book, Defying Futility, it shows when the Titanic sank, 1,500 lives were lost. And here's all the boats. That's Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet there down at the bottom on the door. But what if there could have been an alternative? What if, when the ship sank, there was some way to have saved all the people? So each one of these stories is a little bit of a mystery. How did they, in this alternate universe where the disaster went otherwise, how did they work? Because we know what had happened in real life. So is there a way that it could have gone otherwise? And each one of those disaster stories has a lesson. So, in a certain sense, they're also like parables. Um, what can we learn from history? Is there something that we can show that happened historically in the past that will teach us how to understand the disasters that's happening to us right now with climate change? Is there something that we can prepare for? Are there early warning systems that we need to adopt? Can we look for expertise outside the usual places? And a big area of expertise that we're looking to leverage is the ones outside the highest echelons of society. What about climate migrants? What about indigenous people? What can they contribute to the knowledge that we need? What ideas might they have? At the same time, if you go back up there, prominent voices are undeniably important. How can we leverage those? How can we leverage not only politicians and climate negotiators, but also people who like celebrities, people like famous authors and actors, and yes, even influencers. Or Grace Chan in the first novel hates being called an influencer, but she really is. Um, what about the idea of if you see something, say something? I mean, this is a kind of early warning itself. And of course, fostering education. One of the stories actually depends on a pair of teachers to be the heroes of the story. And you don't see why until the very end, after the two teachers have already died of old age, why their legacy was important in preventing the disaster. So in this sense, this is how we are determined to showcase that inspiring or imagining rather, a green economy is something that will help it happen. So if you cannot even visualize where the future is, then how can you actually find a way to make it happen? And indeed, the people who are here at COP30, a lot of them may sound like pessimists. If you say, so is it going to work? And then, and they have their kind of downcast eyes and they get frustrated with the negotiation process. But if they didn't think that there was some opportunity, they wouldn't be here. They wouldn't have dedicated their careers to this process. So, for lack of a better person to quote from, we went with George Lucas, that you can only do it if you can imagine it. So what we want people to do is imagine that future and take action to make it happen. And even if that is in the world of fiction, then the idea is will be reflected in real life. So that's it for this session. And thank you to the hundreds of people who showed up for this. I'm really impressed and amazed that we have such a full house. And I really hope that we will see each other again soon and that you will all buy at least 10 copies of the book for your friends and enemies. And I think that's it. So, and take a picture.